Israel. So the lesson was finishing it around half past. So I will go on. So I will just give you some reflections on climate change mitigation, but then touch more, especially around our current nationally determined contribution and our low emission development strategy. Maybe we just want to understand the effect, especially for mitigation. When we talk about climate change mitigation, we specifically talk about mainly two things which are very, very important. One aspect of mitigation is on the reduction of emissions. I think it's very, very important also. And obviously the other issue, which is also carbon sequestration. So in these approaches, we need to be able to look at them in their context, and so that we are able to ensure that as young people, especially the young people, definitely you are very, 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 very interested in ensuring that whatever we are doing, we are more on the proactive side of things, which now means we definitely need to deal with the issues of carbon sequestration, very important, and also maybe a reduction. So for our country, as Zimbabwe, our mitigation actions specifically in 4 sectors of the IPCC, which is energy sector, I follow IPPU and waste. Maybe I'll just explain what it means anyway. For energy sector emissions, what do we mean? When we are talking about energy sector emissions, we are talking about all emissions that we emit to the atmosphere as a result of our need to produce energy. And a good example is what we use even in the transport sector, what we also do when we produce energy in our plants, when we, that is electricity plants, when we also produce energy, even in industry, when we produce steam, we do our production processes, we also produce energy. So that's what we use. But more importantly, also even in our home, we cook. So when we talk about the energy sector emissions, let's not point at a person who is in industry. Let's not talk about a person who is possibly operating a machine, but let's talk about ourselves as we are doing our cooking. Right now, I'm in a room, is possibly during daytime. When I go out, do I just go out or I switch off the lights? So if I do not switch off the light, I then produce more energy sector emissions. If I do not plan my cooking very well, I also produce more energy sector emissions. So energy sector is not only for industry, but also for me. Whatever I do for energy, if we are coming from a certain place, each and every one of us is driving. We are not sharing cars. I'm also producing energy sector emissions because of the way I do things. So that's what energy means. Then for a follow, that is agriculture, forest and other land use. If we're using synthetic fertilizers, if we are obviously cutting trees and we're not replacing them, we're obviously producing a follow sector emissions, and we are also doing indiscriminate burning. It's also a follow sector emissions. So that's very, very important to be able to look at. So we also have IPPU emissions. And what does it means? It means industrial processes and product use. What does that mean? Very, very important. We know that in industry, we burn coal and other fossil fuels for energy. But remember, at one point also in the industry, we use coal not as a source of energy, but we use coal as part of our as part of reactants. That means I want to react iron ore with the carbon so that I'm able to produce the pure iron. So coal, since it is predominantly carbon, I need that carbon to react with iron ore so that I produce my pure iron. So when I use coal in that form, I emit a carbon dioxide, which is an emission for industrial process. So it's not energy per se, but I'm using coal as a reactant. That's what it means. So all emissions that we produce in industry in any way as a result of using our fossil fuels, not as a form of energy. These are industrial processes emissions, very important. Then for energy, then for waste, we know we have wastewater, we have solid waste. And much of the emissions which are coming, especially from the waste sector, are methane. Lots of methane sector, methane emissions are coming from there. So yeah, when we treat sewage, we have these emissions. So basically, I just wanted to give you a snapshot of all these emissions and what they mean when we talk about these sectors per se. So you might be in the agriculture sector as such, but possibly producing a lot of energy sector emissions. And basically, that's what I wanted to talk about. Now, going to my country, possibly Zimbabwe, I want to just give a snapshot of what we have as our mitigation planning for the sector, for the country. Zimbabwe is just a developing country, and our emission profile is around obviously less than 0.5% of the global emissions. So we do not produce much of the emissions as such. But that does not mean to say that we do not need to take actions. What we now need as a country is that as we are developing, we know we are a developing country, but as we are developing, we need to ensure that our development path is a development path that is clean. So what then have we done? We have done two things. We have managed to produce our low emission development strategy, which is our green economy strategy, very important. We've also managed to come up with our nationally determined contribution. One thing that is very, very important and critical to understand is that the low emission development strategy is an internal document for the country, which ensures that the country itself is committed to reducing emissions, and it may not be subject to international review as such, but it shows commitment for the country. So it has the domestic MRV. So under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the countries are encouraged to communicate their low emission development strategy. It's not so much of a compliance document as such, but it's a commitment document. And the countries that have produced the low emission development strategies, they can come up with robust processes in country to ensure that they move towards the low emission development pathway. Very important. So as a country, Zimbabwe, with our low emission development strategy that seeks to reduce economy-wide emissions by 40% by 2050. But obviously there is a toll right now for countries to come up with a net zero target. So it's an internal debate which we now have in the country, and our principals in government, they are looking at ensuring that we come up with a net zero target. So we are just thinking about that one as a country, and we're moving towards that as a nation. And our low emission development is looking at reducing emissions in energy sector, emissions in agriculture, emissions in land use change and forest, emissions in IPPU, emissions also in waste sector. But the way we have done our low emission development strategy is different from many other countries, in that our low emission development strategy is a costed, it has costed strategies, 38 strategies that we've come up with, in which are well costed with our marginal abatement cost curves, and they are very clear with that one. And we have also, as a mitigation measure in the country, we have come up with our nationally determined contribution, which is the NDC, which is also economy-wide. It's also looking at energy, at emissions in the energy sector, IPPU, waste, and also follow as such. But maybe some key also highlights of our nationally determined contribution. Now, since Zimbabwe is more of an agriculture-based country, much of our emissions, almost 65% of our emissions, are coming from the follow sector, and 35% of our emissions obviously from energy, and the others obviously contributing little. That is other sectors. So, and maybe one thing that is maybe very, very important for our NDC, in the construction of our NDC, we took the issues of gender, and we also took the issues of youth very important. I remember at one point when I were developing the national development contribution, because I was leading the process, with the time to sit down with one of our obviously leading organizations in the country, young people, especially from Ike. I was talking to Elizabeth and obviously Jean and many other young people in Zimbabwe, so that we would come up with a consultative process to ensure that young people are consulted across all the 10 provinces of the country. And we managed to have a plan with this organization and many other youth organizations. So they had consultations across the country in terms of what they want to see in the nationally determined contribution. And that was done well before the NDC was produced, and the petition or their issues were handed over to the minister, and we managed to include that one. And one thing that we are seeing as a positive from that, the young people in Zimbabwe, they are identifying with the NDC, and they are having their programs tailored towards the NDC, because it is the document which they participated in, and they put forward some of their issues within that. And there's a lot of capacity building issues, obviously, within the NDC. And I'm sure those who have done the statistics, they say our NDC talks about young people. It captures the word youth in more than 11 captions. And it also talks about the issues of gender. It also talks about the issues of just transition. So we've seen the interaction that we had, especially with young people, to be very, very constructive, to such an extent that when we were developing our NDC, it stood to be one of the best NDCs anyway in Africa. And those who were doing their punching of numbers and all these ones, they were saying our NDCs are among the top 5 when we're doing that. But we definitely attributed this one, especially to the participation of other key stakeholders. So in the coming NDC, definitely it becomes my recommendation, even for ourselves and also even other governments, to ensure that we bring in all other stakeholders, so that as we are producing our documents, it's one thing to produce a document, but it's also another thing to ensure that you are able to meet that target. Because if you are not able to involve the stakeholders, it will then be very difficult for us to be able to implement. So as we are implementing our NDC right now, we are seeing a lot of participation, especially from the stakeholders, because they see value in this process. So basically, that's what I can say for now in terms of our climate change mitigation. So maybe possibly going to COP27, definitely what we are definitely looking forward to seeing is to see more action, definitely to see more, especially financial commitments. We also want to see even more capacity building, especially for young people, to ensure that all these issues are taken seriously. And maybe one thing that I might also see, which is also an opportunity, is that there are a lot of opportunities, especially now, for young people to participate in the transparency framework of the NDC. We still need a lot of experts to participate in the transparency framework. And it's something that we definitely need to look at the opportunities and explore all these opportunities going forward. I, for now, rest my case. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Lawrence. I think you had a very deep insight on what NDCs hold in terms of mitigation, and we are very grateful for what you have shared with us. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Now we will just move on to our second speaker. I see we have a couple of questions in the chat. We will try to address it towards the end after our second speaker. Now I would like to invite Alungwa Desmond, who is the co-founder of the Green Africa Youth Organization, GAYO, and the Africa Program Coordinator for the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. Thanks for joining, Mr. Desmond.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm really glad to be here. I think I'll just make my presentation from my side, if that is okay. So let me try to do it from here. Is it showing yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Should be seeing it now. Is it?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm glad that I have the opportunity to speak with everyone here. And following with what Lawrence just ended on, would be speaking with all of you a little more tilted towards adaptation side, as he's already handled mitigation with respect to the NDCs. But then I want to bring this slide just to throw in a little bit of background, because it's important for the adaptation wing. So we all here, I believe, are climate enthusiasts. So we probably have been following the conversation, the various regimes and the changes that has happened. So how did these NDCs come about, and how did we get the opportunity to actually start mainstreaming climate change adaptation as one of the very much focused pillars? So we know about the Kyoto Protocol, which was one of the first landmark conventions that actually demanded countries to take action. And then with time, the regime realized that there has been a lot of changes with respect to countries' economic growth, with respect to people, new emerging geographical challenges that countries were facing. So they sort of, through the Paris Agreement, brought in this NDCs, which is like one of the highest commitments country could actually take on under the Paris Agreement to act on climate. And then with this, one of the key principles that was guiding it was the principle of what? Differentiated, common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Basically, what this means is that we are facing a common problem differently, and we are having different level of abilities to deal with the problem that we are facing. And so therefore, the responsibilities would also be different, and our strength would be different. And such actions are recorded as the national determined contributions, which ever since has been giving us the opportunity to negotiate and see and also the opportunity to see who is doing what and what level of commitment others have put in. Now, this is a basic structure of the NDCs, whether you are working on adaptation focus or you are working with mitigation. It's more like a cycle. Every 5 years, we are back to this, the blue zone. So from the blue zone, you get the opportunity to look at the entire thing that has happened and what countries have put their commitment in, which one have succeeded, which one hasn't. And then from there, you sort of revise, improve, and decide on what you are going forward with, implement that. And then we are gradually going back to the blue zone where we reassess everything. It's called the global stocktake, happening every 5 years with respect to the NDCs. Now, climate change adaptation. Again, I'm making this presentation based on the assumption that most of us here are already a bit aware of some of the basics. So I would jump the long definitions. But basically, what we are dealing with is that we notice that working on mitigation alone, working on reduction alone couldn't solve the problem when people are already suffering the cascading impact of climate change. So adaptation came as a result of the need to empower people to survive the current impact of climate change while giving them the capacity to take advantage of the opportunities that are also coming up as a result of these solutions they are implementing. So on the adaptation track, countries, and it is worth mentioning that this is also a track that is really at the heart of most of the countries in Global South. And you can understand why. Just a week or two ago, we've all, via social media, witnessed what is happening in Pakistan. So many people are dead, over 1,000 people are dead. So many homes are destroyed. So many people are now hungry. And that is a very glaring impact of climate change that you don't need to go far to see. So in the Global South, countries, parties have recognized that climate change adaptation is very necessary because you first of all need to live, you need to have air to breathe, you need to survive before you can actually talk of thriving or before you can talk about mitigating it. So in order to survive, you need to prioritize climate change adaptation. And if you look at the key areas where interests have really been looming, you could understand why agriculture, energy, water, these are really like the basic needs in life. And so you can understand why the AGN, especially like the Africa Group of Negotiators, put a lot of interest in climate change adaptation. Now, more on this sector. So as we are preparing for COP27, Conference of Parties 27, countries are looking in what do they bring in as far as adaptation is concerned. And this is something they've been putting a lot of energy into it because all the past years until recent, mitigation has been the goal until we realize that, okay, mitigation is good, but it is not the best when we are struggling to actually even survive. So The dominant areas on the adaptation track that have been discussed, and I don't know how many of you got the opportunity to view some of the recent reports from the IPCC this year. They released a really concrete report on agriculture focus. And much of the focus is on land use, because again, it is very important that you understand the strategies of current land use systems in order to make good use of the limited biodiversity or nutrients that are there. Climate resilient infrastructure is another standing very much common pillar across the globe or across countries that have submitted their NDCs. Ending this year, March, we reviewed under Gaia, the Global Alliance on Incinerator Alternative, we reviewed 47 NDCs. And some of these key things were also standing out. But our focus was more on trying to understand the justice angle and also how some of them really prioritize inclusion as a pillar. But then these were some of the things that stood out. And then integrated water resources management. That's also another global challenge. We have a lot of countries that are having internal conflicts, land conflict, conflicts around boundaries, conflicts around water resources. And apart from those conflicts, we also have a lot of countries that are suffering a lot of drought, they are suffering a lot of floods, and there's the need to have a way of adapting to that current situation where you have too much of this, and then on the other hand, you just don't have, the other group just don't have at all. And that is basically at the center of adaptation more than it is connected with mitigation. And then also vulnerable groups. Now, I started by talking to you about the fact that for adaptation, the basic goal is that you need to be able to live. You need to survive before you can actually mitigate climate change. You need to survive before you can do anything. And when it comes to survival, there are certain groups that cannot have the same ability to survive as against everyone else. And that, again, is also included in the core principles of the NDCs, which is based on what? Common but differentiated responsibilities and capabilities. So the NDCs of a lot of countries that are focusing on adaptation, also focusing on building resilience for vulnerable communities, vulnerable groups. And when we are talking of vulnerability, gender becomes very important and very sensitive in this sector, because again, in terms of capabilities, we do not have the same capabilities. Still on this, so over the years, ever since adaptation started getting a little focus, it's been not all the groups that wholeheartedly want to commit. So again, it is the same way just with climate change as a whole, where you have a lot of countries pushing and then some countries being dormant and some countries not even sort of pushing back. So with respect to adaptation, again, because it is not as important in some countries as it is in a lot of the countries in the global south, the global goal on adaptation has still not been adopted as a very, as the way we discuss mitigation during COP. And this is something that different groups and different countries are taking on, especially this year. Those of you who might know that few countries like Ghana and then a few others are now selected, 5 countries are now selected to be in the climate vulnerable forum, organizing the climate vulnerable forums. And one of the key things is that adaptation has to take a center stage. This COP, next COP, and COPs that will be coming. I'm still here in Europe. I haven't even gone back to Ghana. We finished the Africa Adaptation Summit in Rotterdam this week. And we had leaders. We had the president of DRC, Felix, and then we had Maksali from Senegal, we had Nanado from Ghana, and so many other leaders, also in leaders from international organizations and institutions, and some leaders from the global north, making commitment. France made a very significant commitment with respect to money for adaptation action, accelerating adaptation, particularly in Africa. Denmark, Norway, and a few others made really significant commitment. So you see that this is a gradual process, as though, even though the adaptation agenda is yet to take center stage, global goal on adaptation is yet to get the attention that it requires, there is still these commitments that are coming in. Mind you, this is commitment. This is not like the money is in, but they are committing. And that is fine to start with, because climate change mitigation also started with commitments and money started flowing in. But then we would now have to end with looking at the youth perspective. Now, some of the things I was supposed to look at is the opportunities and challenges, apart from talking about this, the level at which we are with adaptation. Then where can youth also benefit or participate and all that. Now, I've talked about where we are, more or less, about the global goal on adaptation, which is the GGA. But the question is, when it comes to adaptation, has the NDCs recognized the role of youth-led initiatives in addressing climate change adaptation? Very little. So we realized that, particularly on youth entrepreneurship and youth businesses and youth-led initiatives, we had like 3% out of 47 countries that are actually mentioning these youth-led initiatives as one window that can help communities to adapt. That is not great, but again, that is an opportunity. And then when it comes to the considering young people as a critical stakeholder during the NDC process, so first of all, we submitted the INDCs, the intended national determined contributions, right? And then it was reviewed and resubmitted. Now, before, when you look at the INDCs and then the NDCs, there was a significant improvement in terms of the language, because at the beginning, the language was very, very youth blind. It did not recognize the role of young people. It did not see them as much beyond vulnerable groups that also needed to be protected. And then when the reviewed NDCs were resubmitted for implementation, then we had about 7% of NDCs that were very prominent and talking about young people, the role of young people, the role of young people. But then when you look at the formulation process, the planning, the formulation, or the design of the NDCs, young people were like the third stage, which means that they plan, they design, and then they consulted young people about what is your take. So youth were not really included at the beginning stage to participate in what is happening to us and how do we, what is our understanding of climate change adaptation? How do we contribute to the NDCs? And then the other role was more on the importance of environmental justice and the role of civil society in the formulation of the NDCs. And I'm bringing this again because climate change adaptation is a thing about human beings, because it is about communities. And when it gets to community protection, it is more of the environmental justice groups, it's more of civil society that are able to stand firm, that are able to identify the problems as early as possible. And there were not enough recognition of this either. But then I'm saying these are also opportunities for all of the young people, because we are doing amazing things in the various communities where we find ourselves. Now come to talk of those who are tackling plastics as a menace in your various communities, helping to sort of decongest drainages, helping to make sure that you take it out of farmlands and make people still have the opportunity to farm in limited areas and all that. These are opportunities that we can push further and make sure that we get recognized and we get called to the seat. Then we have the other thing, which is our voice and our smartness, because if we look at 2019 alone, the kind of movement that was built around climate change activism, we can bring adaptation to the floor. We can make sure adaptation get the recognition that it needs by just making sure that we understand, we inform ourselves, like some of these webinars, we inform ourselves, and we take our national government serious. We question them, we ask them for transparency, we ask them for explanation of the goals that they have set as far as climate change adaptation is concerned. And the same way with the Global North, we make demands that they take adaptation as serious as they've taken mitigation, and with time, things could happen. So basically, inclusion is a key thing that has not really been equal, or has not been as serious as if we look at mitigation. But then it is also an opportunity that we can push further and make sure youth and young people in general are properly recognized and included in climate change adaptation decisions. I'm going to end here so that we have the opportunity to have questions and answers. So back to you, Shraddha. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the very detailed introduction on the adaptation section for NDCs. Thanks so much, Desmond, for that. So we have had a few questions in the chat, and I think we will have a bit more of discussion with more session like that. So Chang Sheng Yang, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question perhaps to Lawrence or Desmond on your theory of climate issue being scientific and security problem of energy? And anybody having any questions can also raise their hand in queue, and we'll try to accommodate everyone. Okay, so I think Cheng Yingshang is not going to unmute. Ishan, yes, please unmute yourself.
How is the government incorporating NDC and especially youth in the role of supporting its implementation? Thank you.
Lawrence, Desmond, do you guys like to jump in and provide some insight on this?
Sure. Could you repeat the question he asked? I was struggling to hear him.
Yes, I have a question. How is governments incorporating youth in its NDC implementation? And what are the measures that can be taken so that youth can be really represented?
Okay, if I get you right, how are governments incorporating youth into the NDCs implementation? So I can speak based on some of the countries that we reviewed. So a lot of the countries, they operate with respect to the localizing or taking local action. So what they do is that they operate based on municipalities. So they don't operate at national level as far as the implementation is concerned. So every municipal assembly or every district or county, based on how you call it in your country, is having a task that is peculiar to that particular county. So when you take, for example, a country like India that is very huge, there is no way that every county will have the exact same needs like the other. Some would have their priority to be energy, some would have their priority to be agriculture, and others would have their priority to be women empowerment in general, or entrepreneurship with respect to adaptation, for example. So what they are doing is that they give the responsibility to such municipalities to program the implementation of NDCs, and such municipalities now engage youth who are doing different activities at the municipality level. Now, to be honest with you, there were a lot of gaps, like I have mentioned, with what we reviewed, because some of them are supposed to have resources to work. And because they do not have the resources to work, they have to limit the participation of certain groups. When it comes to, for example, taking a decision with regards to approving a certain international deal, or inviting certain donors, or inviting certain business partners to partner with NDC implementation. So they limit it to maybe just few people who are in government or people who are in the office. And so young people are not as incorporated as they could be. Whereas in other places, they've also launched more like youth targeted opportunities. So asking young people who have ideas on climate change adaptation to submit those ideas and get the opportunity to partner government to implement them. That is when you have a party or a partner, an international partner or a business partner willing to support youth with some financials. So partnerships becomes really, really key for the incorporation of youth when you look at the NDCs that we reviewed. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think Lawrence too is available to add more.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Really got the answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Desmond, for the elaborate answer. It really answers the question. Maybe I'll just add a few things around what the young people can do, obviously coming from the government. As we know that when we talk about climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation, we are talking about especially issues of innovation, invention, new solutions for energy, which are coming right now. So the framing of the NDC, like Desmond has been saying, is that we definitely do not need to just say the young people, what do you think about this? But it's really about framing the future together, because we are looking for solutions that will take the country forward. So the young people have a lot to offer, especially in the NDC and the adaptation for climate change, because we are looking at the provision of solutions. We are looking at even innovation. We are looking at how then do we ensure that our planning is futuristic. So therefore, the planning which is futuristic definitely needs to put everyone in the equation in terms of that planning. So the paradigm shifting in terms of thinking, it has to be the starting point, so that we do not see other people as those whom we are consulting or who are benefiting as a result of our actions. No, not as such, but every one of us here has a stake to play, especially the young people, because the issues of climate change, they are more of sustainability issues, and they are also looking into the future. So basically, it is my belief that the young people will have to take more of the role in climate change. I say so because in the way I do climate change mitigation in the country, so far, I've sort of invested much in terms of young people. I'm very much proud to say that a lot of young people whom we are seeing today, I've also done a lot in ensuring that we try as much as possible to knock doors and open doors. And some of them which were closed anyway, we're trying also to open them. But it is my recommendation that if we are to possibly manage to ensure that the planning and the paradigm shifting, especially for governments, looks at issues of working with young people, not only as a form of getting their ideas, but also embedding everything that they have, because they are the alpha and the omega anyway in the transformation process. Thank you.
I think that was a very elaborate answer. Thanks, Desmond and Lawrence. It's nice to hear two different aspects and perspective of people from different sectors working towards the same goal. So it's really nice. Thank you so much. I think we have a couple of more hands up in the air. So I know there was a technical issue and most of your names are still Shreya Casey. Apologies for that. So somebody who has just raised the hand with the title shown as an orange N, could you please perhaps unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Naftari Mutai from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm just happy to hear from you. I'm just based in Nairobi, Mukuru Kayaba Salams, where we have a lot of youths that really need to be empowered. Now, I'm just excited because I find this to be quite an opportunity whereby we can address youth issues and in terms of empowering them. So my question is one, but plenty too many. So what I'm asking is, now when we talk of climate change, resilient and adaptation, or climate smart, maybe agriculture, my major concern is we as youth, we have a lot of problems that actually need to be addressed, I would say immediately. Though youth is a transition, but we need to address them immediately and appropriately. So what I'm asking is about alternative livelihoods in terms of climate resilient and climate adaptation. My point is this, like what I'm doing here in Kenya, in some semi-arid areas where you cannot have the staple crops like coffee or even tea or including maize, we have actually adopted, or we have tried to introduce some herbs which can do well in semi-arid areas for essential oil processing. For instance, during the COVID era time, including now, through our initiative, we were able now to get some essential oils, including non-wood forest products like eucalyptus, which was very key, which is very good in terms of sanitation. And you find some people perhaps who could not produce, for instance, in their ads, they could not even get like maybe 10,000 Kenya shillings after they adopted a planting of these herbs. They would even get like maybe 40 or 50 Kenya shillings. Now, that thing, that's what we are saying, it's another way of bringing income, biodiversity, conservation, creating jobs for youth and the community at large. So we feel perhaps that an initiative that need to be supported, whereby we can have alternative livelihoods in terms of empowering our youth. Question number two, now that we have the NDC, maybe, and I think somebody has mentioned about the limitations in terms of in terms of maybe FADICs and all that, that youth are not be able now to participate fully in terms of getting these things in order. So let me ask, because now this is global, and I think we have solutions right here. What is being done, for instance, or what can we do maybe in terms of monitoring, so that we are able now even to, like maybe in our country here in Kenya, we are able now to monitor and perhaps even assist the youth in coming up, probably in terms of NDCs, and actively being there, that through those initiatives, they can also have their income, and we can also maybe connect them with the right partners, maybe the UNDP, FAO, World Health Organization, and so on and so forth. Is it also possible maybe globally, we have maybe a system whereby we are able now to monitor and even able to assist to capacity build all these NDCs, maybe from South Africa to West Africa, maybe even including Europe? How can we be able to network maybe in people in South America, maybe in Europe, in India, in Austria? I mean, how are we able now to connect or to link those dots so that at least ultimately we can empower our youth? Yeah, that's why I said my question is one, but pretty too many. Thank you so much. And God bless you.
Thanks so much for your question. Yeah, pretty much it's a very elaborative question. Desmond or Lawrence, would you guys like to jump in and perhaps give your opinion on that?
I thought you would just take Anusha's question in addition, so we
Yeah,
can.
sure. Anusha, would you like to pop in your question?
Yes, thank you very much. My fellow friend just spoke a lot about what I was trying to say, but just I would add one line to maybe summarize. One comment, then one line. In my country, youth are doing a lot of action, but individually or in groups which are scattered. A lot of climate actions. But also last year, I organized a climate conference, and in that I introduced the youth to NDC. I noticed that many youth were not aware of NDC and what it represents. And in doing so, also, youth voices are not represented when doing NDC. So because in my country, youth are not consulted in the process of NDCs. So where the problem comes is when youth are doing projects to adapt or mitigate climate change, it becomes difficult to record and also report those actions to the government. And me, in my instance, I am going to ask a question. Do you think that we need a formal structure such as a climate council for the youth to be able, one, to empower them with proper training on NDC and policymaking, and secondly, to give them the chance to record and report their actions in order to receive financial and technical support from donor countries. And thirdly, this would be an opportunity for them to be able to participate and be represented in NDCs by stating their needs and their creative and innovative solutions. So I would like to know, is it feasible to have such a structure to enable youth voices to be represented in the NDCs, or else what can we do? Thank you very much.
Thanks. I think both of the questions were a little bit smushed together with the importance of youth. Desmond or Lawrence, would you guys like to jump in?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks to Shreya and Anusha. Both of you have asked really great questions. I think I'll start with the first. And I think the first is also Anusha's question. And so I also work as an advisor to a number of funding agencies. And for the last couple of years, I have managed to make sure that some organizations are able to do regranting and giving out microfunds to organizations and informal sector, especially youth who are in slum areas, who are doing things that are really good, but they do not fit into the so-called formal institutions that they are able to access certain amounts in other areas. And I think that is something that we all need to encourage. Most of us here are young professionals. We are not just youth, we are young professionals who are providing capacities in different areas. And that's how you do it. And then when you are concerning Sraya's question about the youth, and also the second question about how to work together with other international youth and know what they are doing. So one way to do that is that we need to try and put a spotlight on young people who are in areas that are not in the limelight. And people like you and other people who are doing different initiatives that have gotten center stage have to put on or shine the light on those other groups. Then the other thing is that we need to take advantage of cooperations and collaborations. With my other work with Gaia, the Global Alliance on Incinerator Alternative, we have more like member organizations in 44 countries in Africa. When you loop yourself into such groups, you may not necessarily make as much as you want, but you have direct access to resources from different parts of the world. People from different parts of the world have solved the same question in different methodologies. You can have access to those resources. And I think that young people who are in different slum areas or different communities should target also becoming members of certain alliances, just for the opportunity that you have the opportunity to learn from others. That's one way. And then the other thing with respect to, so that's one way to do the collaboration part. Then with respect to the question on whether we should actually formalize and put ourselves in certain structures to be able to access certain things, or I think that what we have to do, oh, okay, I think I was giving the wrong name to somebody else. What we have to do is that an example with what you asked, my organization, Green Africa Youth Organization, started the Youth Climate Council, now getting to 2 years now. And we have seen the advantages this has given us. Now we have Youth Climate Council in Ghana, we have in Brazil, we have in other countries, because we started one in Ghana, provided capacity for the expansion of the Youth Climate Council in East Africa, in Brazil, now in Costa Rica, and we are hoping to expand this. With the Youth Climate Council in Ghana, we were able to actually form partnerships that couldn't have been formed when you are just a standalone entity, which is very micro level. We've been able to support other groups at regional levels in the country and organize consultations at different community levels, and even support people with mini grants that they are able to prototype their ideas. Now, these other groups that we supported with mini grants couldn't have been able to apply for example, for money from maybe the GEF, the UNICEF, UNDP, and all those big names, because they have certain reporting standards, they have certain criteria you cannot meet. You are still young, you don't have much credibility. So without forming these groups, it becomes difficult for you to access it. So should we form youth climate councils? Yes, I would agree that that is the way to go, but not necessarily youth climate councils. If what is flexible in your country is to belong or to join a consortium and apply for something, do the consortium, and it's still also going to give you the voice. But be open-minded to learn from others who are in different parts of the world, who have probably encountered some of the situations that you are encountering. You have organized programs, introduced NDCs to some of the youth in your place. Kudos to you on that. And if in order not to be in the struggle alone, form alliances with other groups, expand your network and loop yourself into some of these networks that you can have access to resources that might be helpful. I think I end it here.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, maybe I can just maybe add a little on that one. Yeah, what do we then need to do? Do we need to form separate groups? What is it? The whole framing of NDCs, both for the young people and also for other stakeholders. I will just take a very good example of how we did it in Zimbabwe. A lack of participation for be it women, be it young people, be it for other sectors. The other sectors, definitely, they were participating. Why? Because when we were framing the NDCs, we were saying that this sector and this sector and this sector is important. So we were looking for them specifically. So, but in our framing of the NDC, we were not talking about serious issues like innovation, solutions, futuristic, all these other things. So that's why we were framing our NDCs on themes which were mainly on reducing emissions. So therefore, we're looking at those issues in terms of energy and others. But one thing that we definitely maybe need to understand is that there is definitely need for capacity building across all sectors, including the young people. So capacity building is a process which needs to be done for everyone. Definitely as the young people, definitely they might be their will, but possibly you might not be in a position to definitely participate because of that capacity building. So my thinking is that there need to be a deliberate move to ensure that all stakeholders are capacitated and they are involved in all these processes. And I would definitely encourage the young organizations, the youth organizations, to be able to organize themselves and also be able to push more, especially in terms of advocacy, because advocacy is very, very important. And one of these, like the activity like this one, is something that is definitely encouraged to ensure that a lot of young people participate in this. And I'm hopeful that when you organize such a wonderful program like this, would want to see more young people participating, because that's where it starts. Because if you're not participating in some of these activities like this, you will not know much of this information. So I think let's continue to organize more of these meetings and also enlighten young people in terms of what are other processes happening, but also for ourselves, also in governments, to ensure that we also ensure that everyone participates in these processes as we go forward. Thank you.
Amazing. I think from both the answers that Desmond and Lawrence has provided us, we understand the importance of having youth in NDCs, and how it is important to not always go ahead and form youth coalitions, but sometimes to step up and be a part of the government in order to make a difference. So I think that's a very, very valuable advice to everybody who has joined here today. And who wishes to work towards NDCs of their own countries. We are wrapping up the session now. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We will be having just a quick photo session right now. And if everybody can turn on their cameras, that would be amazing. It's going to take a couple of minutes.
Take the picture. Waiting for a few more seconds.
Shreya, let us know once it's done.
Okay, yeah. Just a few more seconds. So I think we are good to go. Do whatever you like smile, show your teeth,
Mhm.
Everybody say NDC.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Just give me 1 more minute. Okay, another round. Yes, we are done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.